Folks, how hope everyone's well. Happy Friday, or if some of you are in nicer weather, then definitely happy Friday. It is really lashing down here. So this week on Chu Chats, we have a few special guests coming in to talk about older people and the city. So we look at Dublin City and Dublin County as a whole, and we ask whether there's enough supports in place, whether there's challenges there for older people, and what is the overall policy that we look at when it comes to older people, and how we can support them, or how they can support us, actually, vice versa as well. So today we have Peter Kavanagh. He is the Head of Communications and Policy at Active Retirement Ireland. We have Brian Rodriguez, who is one of the members of Alone, and will be speaking on behalf of his own experience as well as services with Alone. We have Beatrix Cassery, who is our regional manager with Age Friendly Ireland. So all three of you, thanks for coming on. It's going to be a very informal chat. So people who are used to the lunchtime chat, we ask, if you want to ask questions, the bar at the bottom, just click on to ask a question, and your questions will be asked during the session. Any questions we don't get to, please email us at lordmayor@dublincity.ie, and we'll get an answer for you somehow. The session is recorded, and if you don't want your name mentioned, I will only mention your first name anyway when asking the questions. So normally we kick off with this session with asking our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves, and also what they do and what their experiences are when it comes to older people or older people living in Dublin. So I'm going to kick off with Brian first, and then Peter, and then Beatrix. So Brian, give us a bit about yourself.
Hi. Well, I'm 78. I'm a retired writer, press officer. I'm a widower. I've been widowed for the past 9 years. I met my beautiful wife when she was 16. I was 17. We were together for 61 years. So as you can imagine, I've missed her a lot over the past 9. And 2 years ago, I lost my sight. I was very fortunate that I had a daughter in Dublin and we had a granny flat beside her house, and she's a journalist who works out of her home. So I fled back to Dublin with my sight loss, and I'm operating out of my granny flat beside our house in Dublin. I have a friend from Alone that helps me to maintain my intellectual and social and creative life, because I'm a retired journalist, as I say, and writer. And I have 2 problems in dealing with the Dublin city. One is navigation, because I'm too old to be trained to use a white stick or to have a guide dog. And the second problem is communication. And for both of those problems, I have human beings. I've got one of 3 beautiful ladies, my daughter, my homestead carer, and my friend from Alone, Carly. And I can go forth boldly, as I say in the movie, on their arms. As far as my intellectual and creative life is concerned, I can use either my daughter or Carly in Alone to do all my emails or go online for me. So my life is actually quite good, and I've got a good social life, despite the fact that there's a very high potential for both loneliness and isolation.
Brian, we're going to go a little bit further into the loneliness, isolation, especially in the last couple of months in a bit as we go in the session. But Peter, I'll move on to you. You're the Head of Communications and Policy with Active Retirement Ireland. So tell us a bit about yourself and what you do and what you see are some of the challenges.
Sure. Thanks a million, Hazel. It's great to be here. And it's funny, it's appropriate, I suppose, that Brian finished his introduction piece, talking about loneliness and isolation, because that's the entire point of Active Retirement Ireland. We're a network of social groups for older people, about 550 or so all around the country, comprising about 24,500 members. And the entire idea is that we try and end loneliness among older people by extending the hand of friendship and allowing older people to lead a healthy and active life well into retirement, at a time when, you know, on the main, if you look at the media, if you read the papers, you kind of feel that there's the sense out there that older people are written off after a certain age. We're out there to prove that older people can still contribute to any level. You know, if you're a writer like Brian, or if you're a sports person, an athlete, we run national events like a national bowls competition. We work with other organizations to ensure that there are many opportunities for older people to still live life to the fullest, still contribute to society in whatever way they see fit. I've been working with active retirement for 11 years now, which is a long time to be with one organization, but it's a fantastic organization. I love what I do, and advocating on behalf of older people has been my life's work for the last while. I'm a social gerontologist, so I studied the science and the politics and the economics of aging in Galway a couple of years ago. And, you know, really, I think one of the key things that I hope we get to grips with today, I know we'll get to grips with today, because I know you, Lord Mayor, and I know what your passions are. This ageist idea that we don't need to plan for older people, or we don't need to include them. The entire point of Active Retirement Ireland is this ethos of nothing about us without us, and trying to give older people a voice and give them a say in planning matters, and in anything that affects them. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we've got an aging population, and I think we need to start thinking about that as a good thing, because the alternative doesn't bear thinking. We all want to grow older. We all want to get old at some stage, and we all want to do it as healthy and as happy and as included and respected and valued in society as we can. And that's what active retirement is there for.
Yeah, and you hit a point there before I bring Beatrice in, is that during COVID, I've heard a lot of the rhetoric, and people say, oh, well, you know, like the older generation, they have their time. Like I come from a family who, growing up in Hong Kong, like elderly are to be respected, and they're there for a long time. And chances are they're ruling the roost as well. That's why we have matriarchs and patriarchs in Chinese culture. But like it's a very odd thing then to see. Well, some people say, well, you know, we don't have to plan for it. And we look across the board when it comes to housing, when it comes to supports, we're not planning as well as we should. But we'll get into that in a bit. Beatrice, tell us a bit about you and what you do and what you've seen in the last couple of months and couple of years in terms of older people.
So thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you for having me here today. So my background, I originally came from the public sector. My background would be insurance, catering, and also I worked in fitness. And I started working with Dublin City Council about 14 years ago. And I worked for 10 years as a sheltered housing liaison officer. So I worked directly with people in housing. It would be, and like that, you would have people coming from all different backgrounds, from homeless background, you would have people from financial contribution lists, and trying to integrate it into a community. The whole ethos of age-friendly and age-friendly Ireland is listening to the voice of older persons. So we listen and we create strategies and policies and deal with government departments on that base, on the voice of what the older person wants. Again, challenges over the last 12 to 18 months with COVID has been massive. But I think, if anything, it has shown us community support, wraparound services, how health and support and services can actually be facilitated at home through technology. Technology is massive as well, and has come tenfold, 100-fold over the last 12 to 18 months, especially for older people. And it's something that we need to focus on to keep people at home as long as possible. We're involved in lots of different strategies and policies, but probably one of the main ones, and it's about keeping people at home, is the housing policy and the new housing policy for our ageing population, which aims to try and keep people in their homes as long as possible with that wraparound service. And coming from that is there's 9 new sites that have been selected, Dublin being one of them, where we will have an age-friendly healthy homes officer, which actually starts next week, and it's a 2-year contract, who will actually pull them services together, keep people living in their communities, because they mightn't actually want to live in their home. They might want the adaptation grant and to live in their home, but they might want to downsize or right size. So we're involved in all from cradle to grave of how people can remain in their own communities, public realm, transport. We deal with An Garda Síochána, the HSE. It's vast and wide, but really interesting.
Thanks, Beatrice. I'm going to ask people if they have questions, put it in the chat, but I guess just off the top of my head, I want to get into Brian, you talked about, especially in the last couple of months, and if you don't mind talking about it, if you're uncomfortable talking about it, we can move on to a different subject, but about the isolation, because we look at how people, everyone has had to isolate in the last 14 months and keep to their own homes, but you said it yourself there, it's particularly hard when you're living on your own and when you've lost a loved one. So what, from the conversation from Beatrice there, what do you think we can do better? And tell us about your experience in terms of isolation and how can we move forward to make sure we have the proper supports there for people?
Well, mine was very dramatic because while I was spending the first 7 years of my widowerhood in Wexford in a fairly secluded, in a fairly secluded farmhouse that we had retired to 26 years ago, and I missed my dear wife dearly, I was filling my time with voluntary work, which kept me busy and kept me occupied. And with failing eyesight, I couldn't drive, for example, anymore, but I kept very busy. Once I lost my sight, then I was completely, I couldn't survive. And I don't think either my daughter or my son would have left me in there anyway. So I fled back to my daughter's house. But even when she kind of took me in here and I was in my granny flat, it still meant that I was dependent on her for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I still appeared to have my cognitive capacities and abilities. But because I couldn't read or write anymore, I asked myself, what am I going to do in my blindness? Am I going to sit here in the flat all day? And I actually called the local public health nurse. And she came around and she, almost with a magic wand, produced 3 things. She produced my home instead carer under the home care package. She produced a loan, and Carly, who's my alone friend, and she produced Meals on Wheels, which means that from Monday to Friday, my dinner and dessert are delivered, and my daughter only has to worry about my meals at weekends. So it meant that my whole social, intellectual life came back into being. And as I say, I can go forth, as I say in the movie, go boldly forth on the arms of any of my 3 carers. I can, because I won't be ever learning to use a white stick or to use a guide dog at my age, but I have a human being as my guide. So it means I can, once the city opens up, I can go out again. And I've started to do that now that I'm vaccinated. And that visits have begun again. So I have a good social and good intellectual and creative life. And I'm appearing in a lot of media and making podcasts.
For those who don't know, Brian is our poster boy right now. So, and he's done a fantastic job. So thank you, Brian. Brian, just, I guess back to my question of, like, the challenges that you have said are hard, and you have had some resources in terms of the public health nurse and that system being able to support you. Is there something that comes in mind where you think, well, this is one thing that I wish was fixed or needs to be done better?
Well, I could just tell you about one single, very practical. It's very personal now and a little bit intimate, okay? Now, I don't have a toilet problem, thank heavens. Even at 87, I'm quite fit and well. But if I do go out, I'd like to think there was a toilet there, you know, obviously for obvious reasons. And I do have 3 female helpers, carers. I don't have a male carer, which means if I'm and I have to plan ahead. And so yesterday I had a friend, one of my first visitors who's blind and been vaccinated, a man came to see me, he's very experienced. And I said to him, when I do go out, because we are planning some trips, and I'm in a place where there's a public toilet or where there's a male and a female toilet, my carer will bring me to the door, but I can't ask my carer to come in. How am I going to cope inside? For example, if I want to use a urinal, I won't be able to see it. And he said to me, just ask any other man and the man will help you, you know. I will point to it, okay? A very practical solution to the problem. So apparently I understand that you can get help at any level, not just crossing the road. But you can even get help if you ask people in Dublin, where's the damn toilet, or where's the urinal, or where's the cubicle?
I think first we need to have the toilets, which is an ongoing problem we have at the moment.
Exactly, so, yeah, exactly. But something we have to think about when we're going out, especially when you're blind.
Actually, that's a good point, because we have tenders coming up for public toilets attached with pop-ups. It might be something I actually will definitely say to Colleen about the attendance, whether there could be someone that can support people there. Peter, I'm going to move on to you, because like Brian talked about how his social life was able to be brought back, or that he wasn't completely then dependent after moving into the granny flat when supports were in place. Like through active retirement in Ireland and through what you've seen through policy, like what is it that we need to do to make sure we plan for better? Because Beatrice has outlined a lot of things there that we are planning for, but obviously there are, like, seeing through your organization of people that come to you and get support of you, like what are the great stories and what are the good things that we need to do better? So
yeah, well, look, Brian is a great example of what can be achieved if someone is empowered and supported to stay in their own home or in their own community for as long as possible. And it's such a positive story, and it's great to hear. And we hear stories of that all the time. I've had people tell me that Active Retirement Ireland is the reason they get up in the morning, you know, going down to meet their friends in the Active Retirement group, maintaining those social connections, that's the reason they put on makeup. And I think that's you know, there's no more ringing endorsement of anything than, you know, it's worth getting up, getting dressed, putting on makeup and going out for. And I think that's fantastic. What do we need to do better? Well, you know, you did promise you'd ask the big and the hard questions, Lord Mayor, and fundamentally we need to change how we think about older people, how we think about care, how we think about what we want to see in retirement, because in essence, the way we look at and speak about and treat older people hasn't really changed that much in the last 200 years. There was a set of laws came in the 1820s in Ireland called the Poor Laws, and they established poorhouses, which became workhouses. And all we've really done successively over the last number of generations is just improve the name and the standard of the building that we funnel people into at the end of their lives. It became, from the poorhouse, it became the workhouse, and then it became the county home, and then the county hospital, and then the nursing home, and now we can use terms like long-term residential care facility. But essentially what we're doing is we still have a care system that's set up in place to push people into this facility at the end of their lives. 4% of older people will need nursing home care. They will need round-the-clock 24-hour nursing home care. But the vast majority of older people can still remain active in society, can remain active in their communities with a little bit of care, with a little bit of support, maybe with an adaptation to their home, maybe with moving in with a family member, as Brian has done, with somebody who comes to see him on the home care package and somebody else who comes to see him as a volunteer, and the support of some family members. People like Brian are able to have full and active social lives and really engage with their communities. And yet, that's not a statutory right. You have a statutory right to nursing home care at the end of your life. And if you can't afford it, the state will pay for it. And you can even leverage your home through the Fair Deal scheme and get access to nursing home care at the end of your life. You don't have that same statutory entitlement to home care. You don't have that same statutory entitlement to stay in your own area. There's a bit of a postcode lottery. If the home care packages are not available in your area, if they've all been used up, if all the funding is gone, you don't get it. But there'll always be a nursing home bed and it'll always be paid for. And that's significantly more expensive, by the way. This doesn't make any sense. For someone healthy, happy, socially engaged, like Brian, who's on the call today, or like any number of the thousands and thousands of older people in the country who could remain in their communities with a little bit of support, that's significantly cheaper to the exchequer than paying an average of €1,100 a week to put someone into a nursing home.
it's funny you say that, because a friend, a mutual friend of ours, did say to me that she's at home caring for her mum, and her first line the other day when she was really frustrated was, "I'm saving the state money, yet I'm not getting any support for it." And the whole point was that there is no, as you say, the statutory care. So, like, do you think one of the big things we need to fix is that statutory requirement to provide for?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very difficult to boil it down to just a couple of key actions that we can do, but absolutely, that's one of them. We definitely need a statutory right to remain in our own homes and in our own communities for as long as possible as we age. It's better for us as human beings. It's better for our communities. It's better for our families. You know, look, at the end of the day, we all want to grow old. We all want to age. We want to age well. We want to see our families grow up We want to maintain our connections, our social links with our friends. We want to keep our hobbies up and keep our activities up. And if we can be supported to do that, the health outcomes are better. And of course, as you rightly say, carers are saving the state billions, hundreds of billions throughout the course of the history of the state. It's unbelievable the sacrifice the carers have made, and they get very little in return. We've only recently started to address the idea of pension rights for carers. The people who have given up parts of their own lives, the opportunity to work, the opportunity to go out and earn money to care for either their own families or their spouses, that they're being denied pension rights. That's still ongoing, and it's something that we're addressing at the moment. So yeah, that's vital. The other thing we need to do, and I'm sure Beatrice is an absolute expert on this, is planning. We need to remember that planning for older people is planning for everybody. And I will get into this, hopefully at some stage we'll get to talk about Dublin and what Dublin needs. But if you just take something simple like benches, like if older people are going to go shopping in town, then you realize that older people are going to need to sit down a little bit more often than younger people, and benches are good for them. And an older person will visit town if there are benches there and there are places that they can take a rest, and they will choose not to visit and not contribute to the society, to the economy, if the benches aren't there. But you also have to realize that those benches help people with disabilities, they help people with young families, they help people who, God, even people who are hungover on a Sunday and just want to sit down on South William Street. It's useful. It helps everybody, and that's the way we need to be planning. We need to start thinking that if we plan for all ages, we actually plan for everybody, people of differing abilities and people of differing backgrounds, the whole lot.
I'm going to ask you, Beatrice, about public realm in a second, but Cormac there has a question about a comment about housing in relation to the fact that we housing is also a major issue for older people. And to Peter's point there about keeping people within a community, like we don't seem to have enough when it comes to people downsizing for housing as well, because suddenly, like I look at my mother, she's getting older. She doesn't need a house that's not that she lives in a massive house, but she will be more suited for a smaller, preferably bungalow, because she has bad knees. So like when it comes to our strategy on housing and how, in terms of your experience and looking at how we plan for housing, what do you think are the things we've done right so far, and what do you think we need to do more of? And we move on to then public realm, because that's another big hot topic at the moment that Peter has brought up as well when it comes to benches. But first, let's talk about housing. Like, how do you think we're doing when it comes to housing for older people?
Well, how are we doing? We're changing, we're adapting, which is good. I said about 2 or 3 years ago, and I'll still state it, that our homeless crisis today will be our housing crisis for older people in 20 years' time, unless we plan for it now. Really great to see the housing options for older persons policy being brought in. It tackles the likes of having infrastructure in place in relation to creating these models of housing. So it's there's lots of documentation on the Age Friendly Ireland website in relation to this. But take, for instance, if you are planning a housing estate in your local area, whether it be Finglas or whether it be Donnybrook or wherever, having the right people around the table. So you have the likes of your HSE and Garda Síochána to talk about the development of the housing and where it's going to be placed. Also in relation to services and link-in services that are there. So have you got a public health centre nearby, doctors, schools, if it's an intergenerational housing model, or is it specifically a housing model for older persons? In Dublin at the city at the moment, we're probably 3.5, 4 years into a new housing model called Housing with Supports. It's in Inchicore, and it's a minimum standard of 1.5 bedrooms, which sometimes has gotten a bit of flack from, because people only need 1 bedrooms. They don't. People actually need 1.5 to 2 bedrooms to age within their own communities. You need that extra space for a carer or a family member to stay overnight with you. It mightn't be all the time. It might be only when you need it. But the Housing with Supports model in Inchicore will actually be run by a loan. It's been built by Circle. Dublin City Council donated the land. The HOC were involved. It's completely universal design, but not only universal design, it's universal design plus. So it has the added extras. So if we were able to get not only a minimum size that would facilitate a 1.5 bedroom, but universal design plus throughout Ireland, never mind Dublin, that would be a major win. You know, if it's universally designed as a house, it could then be adapted into the likes of the Ava housing model, which could be upstairs, you could turn or renovate into an apartment as you age. If you were living on your own downstairs, that it's easily adaptable. At the moment, the houses aren't easily adaptable. The home adaptation grant is there, but that's limited as well in what you can do with it. And the majority of Dublin houses that are 60 to 80 years old need an awful lot of work to put into them to adapt. There is options for people to downsize. There's the financial contribution scheme, which Dublin City Council offer at the moment, where you can actually sell your house privately or publicly, and you give a contribution depending on your age to Dublin City Council, and then you can move into one of these housing models. But again, the supply isn't there at the moment. But with COVID, there was a big hold up with COVID, and I suppose as well, when you look back in the last recession, there was a stop with building houses. So we're still trying to catch up. There's a big catch up game as well. But I would like to think that we are.
Before COVID, though, Beatrice, you mentioned there that our homeless crisis is going to be, or what will happen with older people and the housing crisis there. It's all interlinked, and our main issue is that we don't have enough supply. We aren't building enough houses. So while supply is catching up, and to your points there, like on things that need to happen as supply catches up, what is there anything interim we can do in the meantime?
Well, at the moment with the new age-friendly healthy homes coordinator, I think that will, or it should, free up an awful lot of housing. So people who are living in bigger houses, private houses and city council houses, who don't know of the options. So it's having options and having information is a big thing. It's a big tool, and it strengthens you, you know, if you have the options and the information. So we would like to hope that statistics will show that people are downsizing or right-sizing for what they need, because some people want to live in a 3-bedroom house all their life. That's fine. But people do want to downsize. It's too big for them, you know, and they would prefer to be, again, some people prefer to be right in their home and not leave it. Some people prefer to downsize into a community that is surrounded by their own peers and not an intergenerational, but it's having the option as well.
Yeah, sorry. I one of the things I noticed, we were talking to some people, architects in Denmark, because as part of the Nighttime Economy Task Force, instead of just the 15-minute city, they were proposing some of the things that they were doing in terms of 1-minute city. And within their 1-minute city, there was a block there where at different levels of their apartment will be for different people. So you had older people at the first floor, you had then families in the second and third floor, and then you have younger people on the top floors, but then the community space was on the ground floor. And it's something that I look at, that I look at other European countries and go, it'd be amazing if we can apply it here. So it's that intergeneration, as Peter was saying and you're saying, in terms of providing people with the right type of housing, but also that they're still staying in their community, that they're still able to interact with people that they grew up with.
Most people will want to stay within their communities. It's not about the home. It's not about the bricks and mortar. It's about their communities. It's about walking up to your local shop and seeing your neighbours or your childhood friends from school, no matter what age you are, to say hello, to have that familiar face, and the familiarity of the community, of the setting, that you know where things are and what's changing. And then the interaction, you know, between what's going on in the community, whether it be from a health and well-being perspective, whether it be your local GEA club, whether it be on Garda Síochána. There's lots of, you know, it's just who we are.
We tend to be a tribe. Brian, Peter talked about public realm there, and how there are some things that we can simply do that will make our spaces more attractive to older people, and they can come in and they can enjoy themselves. If I was asking you to design the city, what would you put in now in terms of the city to make it more older people friendly, to make it easier for yourself? Or what would you like?
Well, the toilets would be number one, you know?
Yes.
Obviously, you know, they would be number one. And well, it's all going to start shortly, because I plan to venture forth shortly to meet a friend for outdoor dining. And the friend I'll be meeting will be also blind. And there may even be a television program about it, you know, the fact that she'll be up coming with her guide dog, and I'll be going with my on my carer's arm, on my guide's arm. So I don't know is the answer, because it's all so new. Because don't forget, we haven't been able to get out for the past year and a half, and I've only had my blindness for the past 2 years, so I don't have much experience. So the answer is I'm probably not a good example, because of the fact that I can't see anything. So I can't go to museums, or I can't go to a show, or to an art gallery. So I don't know whether or not I'm a good person to answer that question. But I certainly can go out and have coffee, or have a lunch, and meet somebody and listen to music and enjoy good conversation when all that becomes possible again. And I will be doing it, you know.
I'm going to insist you pop over to the Mansion House before I finish term, and we can have a chat about whether you think there needs to be more done to the public space after you got to walk around town and see how it is. Because I think you're right. Having experienced it, then you'll be able to maybe give us some ideas of how we can do better. Because I think the city currently is changing with the Recovery Task Force. There are things happening, but there does need to be feedback from people in terms of how can we make it better. So like Peter, you were just saying there in terms of public realm, just even benches, but like what else have you seen that it needs to be actioned, like in terms of post-COVID? So
yeah, I think COVID provided, look, it was terrible, and we know a lot of people who've lost loved ones, and older people have paid a huge price. They've really sacrificed a lot. Cocooning was probably a necessary step, and I think nobody doubts the science, and nobody doubts the advice, or nobody that we know in our organization doubts the advice that came down from NEFIT around this, and trying to keep older people safe was worth it and a laudable goal. But now we're realizing that there's a whole cohort of older people that loneliness is affecting, that it never affected them before, because they've been shut away from society, because they've been cocooning. And loneliness is, believe it or not, loneliness is more dangerous to an older person than smoking 10 cigarettes a day. It exacerbates mental illness. It can bring on Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. It can actually even increase the prevalence of heart disease and certain types of cancer. Loneliness is an absolute killer. So COVID, while it was terrible and did lead to that increase in loneliness, it has created this opportunity to reimagine what the city could look like. And I think we've seen that with increased pedestrianisation, and we've seen it with increased cycle infrastructure and the likes, and I think that's good. And hopefully we'll be able to take those learnings, those lessons, and apply it to how older people see the city as well. And I'm always reminded of, in 2012, we had a big year. It was the European year for solidarity between I have to say this right. It was the European year for active aging and solidarity between the generations, because our friends in the EU, they don't like short names, they don't like catchy things at all. But one of the things that happened there was a group of transition year students in Ennis in County Clare who decided to see if they could do anything in Ennis to make it a bit more age friendly. And they surveyed older people, they spoke to business owners and the likes, and basically they got this one idea: what if they could make the green man last a little bit longer when you're crossing the road? What if you could just make it just last that little bit longer? So they put this idea out, and Clare, it was the town councils at the time, Ennis Town Council, took it on board and made every single pedestrian crossing in Clare, they made it 15 seconds longer. Or not Clare, sorry, Ennis, specifically the town of Ennis. They made it 15 seconds longer. And they found out that drivers hated the idea of it, but they didn't notice the actual application. They didn't notice at all. Not one driver actually submitted a complaint after the fact. And yet it benefited not just older people, but people with families, people pushing buggies up and down the streets, people with mobility issues, people with disabilities. It was of benefit to almost everybody. And yet when they brought up the idea, drivers were absolutely livid about this idea, that it might take me 15 seconds longer to get down this road. You can't be doing that. So in answer to your question, in a sort of a long-winded way, I hope that we can learn from COVID that we have to stop listening to who we're listening to. and maybe stop listening to car parks and the owners of car parks around what's good for Dublin, and start listening to the people who could be coming into the city but aren't, and what they need. And that's toilets, and that's benches, and that's maybe 15 seconds longer to get across Dame Street. It's little things like that that will make all the difference. And it's little things that are there and put in place for the good of the citizens, for the good of the people who want to come into Dublin but can't at the moment, or feel like they feel unwelcome. Like Dame Street is one of my favorite streets in the whole of Dublin. Some of the stuff on Dame Street, some of the restaurants, the bars, the whole lot, it's absolutely lovely. But try walking on Dame Street on a busy Sunday afternoon if you feel in any way infirm, or you feel like if you get nudged, you might fall over, and you've got a fear of falling and you're worried that you might break your hip or anything like that. Dame Street is one of the widest streets in Dublin, and the paths are barely a metre across at some stages. So how is that welcoming for older people who want to get from one part of the city to another? So I hope that we can have a look at what we've applied in COVID, what we've done to the city in COVID, temporary pedestrianizations, more street furniture and the likes. What can we keep and what can we do better on that makes Dublin that bit more inviting? Not just for older people, but if you do plan for older people, there will be fringe benefits for others. That's a guarantee.
Well, it's the point you said of if we do plan, I think we must plan. So I think the whole premise of this conversation is that a lot of times we tend to leave older and younger people behind, because younger people get a lot of the flack, older people get left behind, and somehow we don't seem to plan properly for both cohorts. So funny enough, Trish on the question and answers there says, time at lights to enable one to cross is a key thing. Well, time at lights is something that we definitely will be bringing up with Brendan. And also the other thing is 30 kilometers per hour, which is something that recently got shot down, which I think would be a huge benefit to younger and older people. So because like the effects of when a car hits at different speeds is massive. Brian, I have Emily here, Emily Conway, who is a amazing artist actually that we've been talking to. She's re-engaging in culture as an artist who is also visually impaired, and she's passionate and also involved in making experiences. For example, created audio described sensory tours at the RHA in case you wanted to visit the RHA, Brian. Emily has made a audio tour there, a sensory tour, and she's also on the advisory panel of the Dublin Cultural Company. So if you have any questions, what I might do, Brian, is pop you and Grania email, and you can email Emily because she's actually great, and she would be able to give some idea of some of the exhibitions and how you can experience them through sensory tours. So I pop that over to you. But Brian, before I move to Beatrix, I guess one of the things I want to ask, like you commented that isolation has been really hard. So if one of the reasons for having these conversations is we want to be able to bring back to the City Council and various other people on some of the ideas and also some of the comments, like what Peter has said there in relation to just even lights changing and how traffic management works and how benches are. Is there anything, if I was to ask you from your experience in the last 14 months, that can be improved and should be improved, and toilets is definitely one of them? What would you say? Like, is there anything that you want me to bring back to the powers that be? Brian?
Sorry, I thought that was for Beatrice.
No, it was for Brian.
That was a question for you.
Oh, sorry. Well, sorry. I beg your pardon.
I was just saying, so part of having these conversations is that we can go back to the relevant departments in the City Council, be it Recovery Task Force or traffic, when we talk about traffic lights there. From your experience in 14 months of COVID, is there anything that you would suggest to the council or even the policymakers that needs to change in relation to your experience and others that you know that are older people that you think I can go and talk to people over?
Well, you see, even before I lost my sight, I had failing eyesight. I had very poor eyesight, but I was still getting around. But I found everywhere I went, every crossing I came to, I always could turn and ask somebody. Usually I'd ask a lady, being a man, you know, and every time I got help that somebody would cross the road with me. So everywhere I went in Dublin, I found friendly people and I've asked some of my other blind friends about this, and they all say that people are extremely friendly to blind people. So we really don't have a problem in that respect.
Okay, well, one of the things Colleen, our manager of Recovery Task Force, has suggested was marshals, because at the beginning of the first reopening of the city, they had people located at certain spots to help people find where certain shops are or tell them of experience. It mightn't be bad to actually have those marshals to help people who are visually impaired or anyone asking any questions. Would that be helpful?
It would indeed, yeah, it would, very, very much so.
I will make sure to note that. So, Beatrice, I'm going to come to you for one of the questions here asked by Cormac. He says, Dr. Sinead Hines of Galway Hospital is conducting a survey on provisions for LGBT older people whose needs are not always met and often find themselves having to go back into the closet when looking for healthcare in Ireland. So, in your experience, in your past experience in the area, are we not providing enough supports for LGBT older people, the comfort of being able to come out, the comfort, like what are we providing and like how do we do better on it?
Well, the supports, no matter what your sexual orientation is, would be the same across the board from the HSE or from your local authority, because they wouldn't discriminate in that regard. If people are feeling like that, we actually have older persons councils in each of our 5 areas within Dublin City. An older persons council member is somebody who represents a group of people. So we would have people from your local gardening group to your local GEA club to care centres. And we are always looking for that diverse person to, like, you know, we found it hard in the past to maybe get the voice of the traveller at the table, because age friendly is all about listening to the voice of the older person, the authentic voice of what they actually say. So what I would recommend Cormac do is get in touch with his local area and try and get a voice at that table with the Older Persons Council. And through that, we can maybe find out what are the real problems or what supports he feels are needed that aren't there at the moment. Then feed that into our area structure, which is our North and South Side Alliance, which would be our decision makers. You know, we would have the likes of the HSE on board on that group. We would also have the universities and policy makers and changers who can actually make changes or influence change. And I think that's nearly the road we would need to go down with this one. In relation to if I could just go back to the public realm piece, which I think is really, really important. Again, with the Older Persons Councils within each of our 5 areas, we have an age-friendly walkability audit toolkit, which at the moment has just been recreated. So it encompasses the green schools and Antashka. It also, we ask for local councillor representation, the HSE and Garda Síochána. We ask for the mothers or fathers with the buggies to go on these walkability audits. And it's basically walking the streets of Dublin or walking the streets of your local community and finding out what the issues are, whether it be signage, timing of lights, the actual lighting itself, the gradient on the ground, what issues are there within a community. And that is then fed into the City Council, which we are in the process of setting up an interdepartmental group, which then each of the departments can take on board what the issues are. And that's majorly important and fundamental going forward to making our city more age friendly. And remember, being age friendly is being universally friendly, from the mother or father with the buggy or the person with the disability to the older person. So if there's anything that anybody can take on board from today, I think that's a really big one.
Beatrice, so Trish just asked there, what is this council? Beatrice is where Carmel just asked her. So this older persons council, what is it? And I'm gonna bring Peter in for a follow-up since he has his hand up. So the older persons council.
So each of our 5 areas have an older persons council, and it's a place where you can voice the view of your group. We're not a lobbyist group. We work collaboratively with organisations, NGOs, state departments, in creating change. So what are the issues? But I suppose it's not a talking shop, and it's not a moaning shop either. You come with ideas and positive solutions as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry, these meetings happen once every 6 weeks in each of our local areas.
Okay, great. Because I think she's kind of asking how to find them more than anything else. So it's good to get the explanation. Peter, I'm going to bring you in on the LGBTQ. I always get it wrong. Question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because it just speaks to the fact that older people are not a homogenous group, you know, and we cannot lose sight of that reality, that older people are not all the same. They're not all, you know, not cookie cutters, and they're not the image of each other. I worked on a really interesting project many years ago called Hidden Lives, which is trying to get to grips with the reality for older gay and lesbian people specifically, but across the broader LGBTQI spectrum. And it was interesting because it was really tough at that stage, and this is about 9 or 10 years ago. It was really tough to get a lot of older men to admit they were gay. It was even harder to get a lot of gay men to admit they were old, admittedly, but that was a challenge we managed to overcome in the end. But I think we've moved on now, and we need to be conscious of the fact that, like, even people from migrant communities, you know, immigration to Ireland, really, it's not something that has been a major factor in our cultural demographics until the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. But if you think about it, those people who came here in their 20s in the 70s are now in their, you know, they're now getting into their 70s themselves 50 years later. They're older people themselves. And what are we doing to address that experience? You know, what are we doing to address as of course, the LGBT experience? But I mean, we just need to bear in mind that you cannot plan for older people as if older people are just some group that go up there on a shelf. And I think the older people's councils, the method that Beatrice is talking about, Age Friendly Ireland has done a tremendous amount of work throughout the country. Some counties are better than others at hearing the voice of older people. Dublin City Council is doing a tremendous job. The key now for politicians like yourself, and full disclosure, like myself, I'm a county councillor in a different jurisdiction, and also for council officials, is to make sure that when you go to the effort of putting something in place like the Older People's Council and age-friendly alliances and all the other networks that we have throughout the country that hear what older people have to say, that they're listened to and that that's implemented, because that's absolutely key. And that we're not ticking a box going, yep, fair play, thanks a million for telling us about the issues that you have, and putting that into a report on a shelf for the next 10 years. It's about the practical applications that will help people. And again, as we've said so many times, if there's one theme that's emerging out of this, it's that, you know, older people are not just one homogenous group. And if you plan to include older people, you're actually planning for a life course, and you're planning for everybody right along the way. And I think that's really, really useful for people to bear in mind.
I think you're planning for yourself.
Hopefully, yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully we all make it to that age. So Brian, I'm gonna close it with yourself in a second, since we're gone past time. But Beatrix, just Carmel had a question there in relation to how can she find out more details about the council? Is there any way she can find out? Is it through the DCC site or?
Yeah, her local, depending on what area she's in, her local area office will be able to give details. There's a local program manager in each of the 5 area offices. So if she rings and asks to speak to the senior community officer, they'll be able to give you details. Or listen, ring myself, there's no problem. My number is up online. There's no problem there at all.
Yeah, that normally invites a lot of calls. So a good woman. So I'm going to stick Peter's number up next as well. Brian, I'm going to end the session with you because I guess I'm very grateful that you took the time out to come talk to us, you, Peter, and Beatrix. If I was to leave you to close the session to say, is there some message you want to pass on to everyone about older people and what to do when it comes to planning for older people? Is there anything you want to say to all of us?
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm 87, I'm blind, I'm old. I have 3 carers, my daughter, my homestead carer, and my friend in alone, Carly. So I have 3 beautiful ladies that I can walk for, go out into the world holding their arm. There's a man on the road here that sees me going past on the arm of one of these ladies, and he said to me, "You're just pretending to be blind." Because he's actually jealous of me, you know. So I probably have a better social life blind and old than I would have otherwise.
Fair play. So, okay, well, on that happy note, thank you, everyone, and I will see you next week. And thank you to Peter, Beatrix, and Brian. And Brian, your inspiration. So take care of yourselves.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.